So this is going to be a short instructional about the basic moves in martial arts. It's not going to be an extensive coverage of all the possible moves within martial arts. I'm going to go through some basics. I'm going to look at the basic punches as found in boxing. I'm going to look at some kicks as found in kickboxing and taekwondo, which was my original background, which I've since branched out from to incorporate all aspects, and some basic takedown stuff. Now I'm limited as to what I can do in terms of particular locks and takedowns and things like that, because it's just me. But it is important to be able to find a way of training if it's just you, because, for example, if you're isolated in some way, or you just don't have any like-minded participants with you, you're going to need to train full on as though you were at the highest level. So what I mean by that is you can't let circumstances dictate what you can and can't do, because that just isn't that's just limiting, which is fine, but it's often the attitude that makes or breaks the situation of and constrains what you can and can't do. So we'll start with the basic stance. I've covered that elsewhere, but first of all, starting with the foot. The foot should be pivoted in slightly. This is to allow more of a push-off. It doesn't really matter whether it's pigeon-toed or fairly pointing towards the opponent. I prefer, if I was to turn this way, I prefer to be slightly pigeon-toed. This gives me a more solid base. The reason being behind that, in certain Tai Chi and static forms, you will find pigeon-toed, knees in slightly. This is because the energy centers or channels of the knee are known to be particularly powerful and positive, so this gives you stability. Obviously you don't see it in the practical examples of sports competition, because this just isn't a consideration, but in terms of everyday practice, it can be beneficial to slightly turn the knees in and pigeon toe somewhat. This gives you a grip of the floor with which to sink down. This is called rooting, keeps you grounded. There should obviously be a corresponding lightness so that you're not fixed to the floor. It's a mobile rooting. Now obviously in the Tai Chi styles and things of that nature, they will stand for hours in this one posture. Now that has practical benefits of building stability and strength and whatever else. However, for our purposes, you may not have time to do that or the inclination, but the basic principle is it builds a certain endurance, and that's why they did that, to familiarise the interconnectivity of the whole system, whether that's for a moment, moving around mobile, or whether that's for long periods or hours in one position. It's the key is to find that whole body involvement, whole body integration. So we've looked at the feet, the knees. There's a slight bend in the knees because this allows you to bound off more readily. However, sometimes they'll be straight, sometimes they'll be bent. They might straighten up to actually move back, to push off one way or the other, to jump in, to kneel down, or whatever for takedowns. So these aren't hard and fast static rules that you will always engage with. it's a question of flexibility. Hips are engaged. There's a tilt of the hip, because then it's easy to throw the punch if the hip is already engaged. Whereas if it's just passive, you're not able to fire the gun if the actual base isn't strong, because the hip is a good shock absorber of power, and more importantly, it is the biggest. This hip region contains the biggest muscles, the most powerful, forceful muscles in the body. So you want these engaged. There's a slight lift and tilt forwards, tilt upwards. So there's almost a rounding corresponding with the whole body. Now this again needs to be mobile and flexible, so you wouldn't necessarily stay in this fixed position. They might be moving back, but these are just general guidelines. Hands are generally up to feel out what you need to do next. It's like if you were catching a ball, you wouldn't just go and grab it, you would have it ready to catch. As I say, we've done other work on stance in the past, so the basic idea is to be in this kind of position where hands are up, ready to block, head, neck engaged, whole body engaged. There's a slight lift but a descent of the chest. This is to allow maximum oxygen uptake, and there's really an emphasis on exhale because that stabilizes the whole core. So these three centers, the neck center, the chest heart center, the hara center, you want these to be engaged first of all. Let's look at the first technique. So the stance, as I say, side on, looks somewhat like this. It needs to be mobile, then there will be adaptations according to what particular martial art you're doing. The first technique I'm going to do is the jab. Comes straight out, straight back. It's a feeler. It's not a powerhouse thing. It's a feeler where it just snaps out, as if to feel your way in a dark room. It's to set up the right hand. So I'll just show you what I mean by that. So hopefully you can see from that the left hand sets up the right. Now this is known in boxing circles as the idea that the left hand sets up the right. But really there's always a movement of both hands in whatever you're doing. This keeps the wheel turning cyclically. 1, 2. The jab, it's with the left hand. I'm going to stand with left foot forwards because this is generally how it works. However, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to have the right foot forwards and reverse these principles. But I'll stay with the left foot forward because that's the orthodox position. Now, the right hand is more powerful. It just slips across out like that. So I'll show you whilst putting this down for a moment. So hopefully you can see from that the right hand is set up by the left, and it's a bit more powerful, significantly more powerful in fact. There's they're in fact polar opposites. The left side of the body is understood to be superior for intuitive movements, touching, feeling out, flowing. So it's known as related to the water element. In my experience, and it's only my experience but also validated by other systems such as yoga, Tai Chi and general experience, the left side is water, fluid. It's not as powerful, but it is more intuitive. So the right side is a lot more assertive, direct, forward, advancing, and fire related. So the two interact, fire and water. This is known as yin and yang in the Chinese systems particularly. So yin is related to water, that's the left. Yang is related to fire, which is the right. Now I'm going to make a lot of reference to this. Left side being fire, water, and intuitive, flowing, and horizontal. I found that you may experience the same thing, that with the left side it's easier to do these horizontal sweeping motions. As with the shield, it's generally held on the left. The jab is more of a sweep outwards, whereas the right hand is more of a direct forward advancing motion. So for now I will make reference to the left being water, yin, and the right being yang, which is to say fire. Now the two obviously intersect in the center, so that if you're working from the center itself, which is the spine, all the way up through the neck down to the base, which is the hara center, the center of gravity, there won't be any real difference. Now this is because at the center where the spine is and where the body's centers are, each separation creates a unity. So there's no differentiation at this center, only at the periphery. So I'm limited as to what I can do with this left hand according to this principle. However, if everything is from the center, there's no division, because there's unity, and there's a polarity which converges and becomes one. So this is an important point. That's the same whether kicking. The right kick is much more powerful, but perhaps less sweeping, and less flowing, perhaps. Now obviously there will be different developed capabilities within people, but this is a principle which holds true, generally speaking. So we've looked at the punches, and how there's a differentiation on the left and right side, which runs through all kinds of movements. This is because the right hemisphere controls the left side of the brain. This has been studied in yoga systems. So the left side of the brain, that's related to logic, which is very direct, penetrative, which is exactly what the right side does. So the left brain, controls the right side. So all these things that the right side of the body is capable of are related to the left brain. So there's a crisscross throughout the system. The left controls the right, and the right controls the left. This is a principle I've been working with for a long time, and I've found it to be valid. So it's a good idea to see if it works for you, at least. Maybe it doesn't, but we'll see. As I say, there's a crisscross. This is known as This is why there's a swirling movement. If you look at the certain symbols of the two serpents around a staff, that's what this is referring to. The two currents of energy. One is known as Ida, which is the water-based feminine quality, which wraps around the central staff column, which is the spine, and there's another swirling snake in the yogic systems, which is Pingala. The two of them create a unity. Now that unity is one of masculine and feminine. That doesn't mean male and female, that just means yin and yang. Again, masculine would be yang and feminine would be yin. So you see this pattern of two reciprocal opposites interacting at the center. So this will be an important point throughout the next time, the next phase of the video. So we've been looking at punches. Let's move on to some kicks, because elbows are very similar to punches. We can do an elbow. It requires the same rotational force. So with any punch, it starts at the hip, the hara center. That initiates the movement. If that's initiating the movement, it becomes powerful. If it's just the arm itself, that can be done too, but it does lack the power. So I have found the left side of the body is better for turning, but that doesn't mean exclusive. Now obviously, if you want to do a kick, you need a corresponding turn on the other side. So when I say the right side is better for dominant, direct, assertive, masculine attacks, it's assisted equally as a contribution by the opposite, which is a turning motion as well as a more intuitive one. So this question of masculine, feminine, that's always working together. There's never a separation. Only in theory is there a separation. So this is said to bring balance to the whole system, the interaction of these two opposites. So we've had elbows. Now obviously it's driven from the hip, but it happens from the waist, well, the toes up. So it's a whole body engagement. If you're engaging the whole body in such a way, over time it's very difficult to go wrong with this, because you'll feel intuitively what works and what doesn't. So if there's an improvement in what you're doing because you're fully engaged in this center, and you extend this to every movement you're doing, there can be no question, if there's that progress and that awareness from within, that it works. Whereas if you were to just knock someone out in the street with this stuff, and yeah, that works, but is there a method for improving beyond that? Often that's lacking. So experience is obviously essential. There's no denying that. And the average person that has knocked somebody out on the street will be more powerful in combat. But it's not always about that. It's about developing your capabilities. It's an equally valid proposition to refuse to really engage with violence in such a way, unless of course your life depends on it and your back's pushed against the wall. That's nothing wrong with that. If you want to go and test it on the street, then that's another matter. So let's look at where else these principles apply. We're going to look at kicking, so I'll just do a quick demonstration of this. So we've got the low kicks there, and midsection, that's a roundhouse kick. So with the roundhouse kick, it's a fairly simple one to do. You just drive the knee forwards, turn the foot, kick across through the target, and step forwards. So again, there's a turning leg and a kicking leg. Knee comes up, arms in, turn the standing foot, kick across, step down. Same with the other side. Kicking across, that can be done low. Be done low like this. It can be done higher, like that. It's the same principle. Obviously you've got the higher kicks in certain martial arts. Taekwondo specialises in higher kicks. I might go on to those later, but it's really not, they're flashy, they're not something you'd rely on as a core set of skills. I recommend in martial arts focusing on a few exercises rather than hundreds that will serve you, and that incorporate other things. What I mean by that, the basic kicks will allow you to do will serve you well, and it will allow you to pick up the other kicks more easily. So if you know how to do a basic front kick, which we'll do in a moment, and you've got that hip action, you've got that awareness, it's only a small step to then turn that over and turn it into a turning kick. So we'll look at the front kick. I'll just do a quick demonstration and then discuss a bit more. Front kick is a particularly useful one because it's easy to do in a situation where perhaps you don't have the flexibility of a more youthful person. You can always rely on this because it's very easy to do. So with this one, you simply raise the knee, extend out, kick through the target, whether that's the groin or any other legitimate target. So this is the basic kick. Can be done high, middle or low. It's not a flick. It's an extension through the core, through the horror centre, into the target. As with all these kicks, they're not flicks. They're thrusts. It's full connection, full awareness and perception of that throughout the entire motion, the entire movement. So we've looked at now basic punches, basic kicks. So the thing to remember when doing these is that they all interrelate. It's no good just being able to do a kick, a punch. No, it needs to all tie together. That's where the stance comes in. You need one that can actually incorporate everything. There's no good going from a taekwondo stance where everything's open to be able to kick, and then having to go into a boxing stance where everything's a bit tighter and in-fight based. It needs to be, there might be adaptations made at the time, but it's got to be flexible to incorporate all those things. So I'll just quickly show you what I mean by that by doing a quick demonstration of how they tie together. So, as you can see, everything needs to link seamlessly. Now that won't happen all the time because you'll be thrown off balance, you'll be attacked, or you'll just make mistakes. That's fine. It's not the end of the world if you make the mistake. Should you be caught in a situation where you've lost consciousness or awareness, you have to have that willpower to actually want to keep focusing and regain that consciousness. Whether or not, if you're knocked out cold, you'll actually be able to is beyond our control at times, but there are times when people simply lose the fight, often in fact, because they've lost the willpower to carry on and summon that strength. So inner concentration is a matter of willpower, and willpower has to be the highest priority in the fight. If you can will it into action, then there's every possibility. So never back down and press on relentlessly, whether it looks like you're winning, losing, progressing in your training. It doesn't matter, as long as you're moving forwards with it, developing, evolving. That's the key. It's not about what you can do or what you can't do. It's about the attitude first and foremost. So identify with that and work. That's the key to all of this. We've looked at punches, kicks, time them together. I won't go through every movement possible. There are a few more things I can mention. Elbows, knees, close range. So these are all used close range, elbows and knees. The kicks are used at the furthest range. They afford you that range. Punches are second to that. Elbows, knees. So it's a complete system. You want all of those things rather than just reliance on one or two. It's about tying them together. So we'll look at a few more. So what I was demonstrating there was the uppercut, the hook, left and right. These are rotational movements. They're not so close. They're not so rangy. They're in tight, almost like a hook. There are many variations of these. Body, head, all sorts of things. The hook is short, the front one is short and sweeping. Again, we have that idea of the left hand being sweeping and the right one being more seeking, advancing, direct, masculine principle. So this is one to remember. As I say, it's a principle that works across things. By focusing on these united principles, which is what I'm trying to hammer home here, you can incorporate, whether you're practicing a punch, kick, it's all the same thing if you're practicing the same fundamental principles. They're just, all the different techniques are different expressions of the same principle at the end of the day. And this is the thing to remember throughout, whether it's martial arts, walking, there's still hip engagement if I'm walking. If I'm writing, doing some art, there's still stabilizing, there's still unity throughout this system. whether I'm playing football, kicking that, anything at all, movement based, these principles are in action. So to the extent that you practice this in daily life, in any situation at all, you're doing martial arts. So I don't consider martial arts to be a style. No, just like yoga. Take yoga or Tai Chi. Tai Chi means the grand ultimate. The grand ultimate means unification. It doesn't mean a style that you practice for 10 minutes here or 1 hour there. It's a principle that holds true in everything, so it can be practiced as much or as little as you like. Yoga is the same. It means the exact translation I can't remember, but it's unification of the whole. So yoga again, Tai Chi, they're not things that are separate from everyday life. They can be incorporated into them. So I say the same with martial arts. It's a system of fighting, it's a system of health, but it's much more than that, and it can be applied as broadly or as or in a specialised way if you prefer. The choice is entirely yours, so it's a question of how much time and dedication you can give to this and how broadly you can apply it. So we've looked at how things can be tied together. The specialised punches, uppercuts, hooks. I didn't go into them too much because you're just really practicing a more rotational thing. The knees, it's the same as the front kick with the knee. Now the knees and the elbows, if I just show you in combination, as you can see, all these techniques can be combined with one another seamlessly, hopefully. The knee is a great exercise for the core. It's a tightening there and a real concentration on the core muscles. This is so that everything is together and tight. Otherwise it's just a hip lift. And so instead of just kneeing like that, it's a whole hip, abdomen, shoulder, head to toe. It's a complete body motion, and you'll find that if you do a knee that's too much based only on the hips, it will hurt your back and it will hurt your hips because they'll be overused. So, as with all techniques, not only are they more efficient if you use the whole body, and more effortless, which enables you to train longer without necessarily having a elite level fitness, but because you're spreading the weight, the load of the work across the whole system, you will find it easier to do and you'll suffer less injuries because no one part is taking the brunt of the effort. So that means not just the muscular system, but the cardiovascular, the nervous system. The nervous system is one that is not emphasized as much as it should be, but for me it's a priority. If your attention is inward and you're feeling involved, engaged, connected to what you're doing in body and mind, then there's not only more motivation and intrinsic internal understanding, but actually there's a switching on of the nervous system which powers the body and enables greater activity to actually take place on the lower levels of physiology and the cardiovascular system, which is to say the breathing. So being connected via the nervous system, which is brain and the body as well. There's the peripheral nervous system, the central nervous system. Being completely tuned in that sense, brings out, really powers the battery and brings out the best possible intensity and aliveness, because at the end of the day it's about experiencing energy, and which is to say life force at its maximum, whether that's thrust out into a punch or whether that's simply internalized to feel a sense of harmony across the whole system. It's tapping into those the energy of the environment and internalizing that and spreading it widely. So we've looked at elbows, knees, tying together, punches. We'll do a brief bit on takedowns, takedown defense, because we've looked at exchanges, punch for punch. But first, the blocking. I'll just show you some blocks. So obviously you can block in any way you want with the hand, like that, near the head, keeping it there. That's blocks the chin. The vital areas are the chin and anywhere around the head, really. The neck as well. Just covering your chin to prevent from knockout, having the shoulders there ready to absorb that. In the punch, if the shoulder's engaged, it affords a certain defensive capability just by doing that. The vital areas to protect are the abdomen, the floating ribs. There are so many. Obviously, the groin, the chin, the head, back of the head, the neck. You'll find it's quite natural to actually defend these areas. You'll want to cover up as soon as the pressure's on. If you're in a closed space, you're feeling quite claustrophobic, you will close up. So this is all tapping into our natural reactions to things, but intelligently utilising it for our benefit. The back of the head is one to protect. That's why we look forward at all times. The chin. So you can cover like this if you're very sure. The problem with really committing to one block is that it's then hard to really keep fluid. So if you're very sure of where the punch is coming, you either get out of the way, or you just block with the entire arm so that it's absorbed there. So these are some things which are covered elsewhere. In any system you'll see a step-by-step, so I don't want to dwell too much. I will just look at some footwork. You can turn off the left because the left, as we've discussed, is yin dominant, and it's very easy to turn off the left. So if you want to just turn away, it's very easy to do so. On this side, if we were to mirror that and I had my right foot forward, I can turn, but it's a different experience internally, because this one feels like it wants to push and this one turns from the back, whereas if I'm in the left foot forward orthodox, I feel like I'm turning here and stepping directly with the right, which is more, as I said, linear based compared with the left. So whilst certain things can be viewed technically from the outside, they often feel totally different. This is why an instructional tape video, which just deals with the mechanics of things, knee up, turn, keep straight, it doesn't go deep enough into the feel of things, because it's one thing viewing it from the outside, it's a totally different experience from within. So it's getting to know from the inside. This is what the inner martial arts is. So take, for example, any experience at all, and you will see that if you just simply practice punching for 10 minutes mindlessly without applying concentration and awareness, that 10 minutes has been spent without being connected to the body, without the mind and body being connected. So that's of a limited value. If you're always aware of how the body moves and you're sensing every step throughout the process, then that experience will build slowly but surely, and over time it's worth investing in. With specialized technical things, an instructor can easily tell you to use the shoulder more, to turn more, but if you're not feeling that from within, it's not going to build a foundation for you, even if it produces these immediate results. So technical training and specialized training for sports, for self-defense, for anything is valuable. But what I'm really interested in is the internal process of feeling these things and relating them to each other, and more widely to everyday situations, which is key for me. So footwork, you'll see that the right foot, this one, can push forwards whether you're moving. This one can turn across. You can push, you can move this side, you can move that side. Now of course, generally when stepping, you step with the foot you're moving in that's going to step first. You plant one foot and then the other, depending on where you want to end up. There are certain rules. Stepping forward, you go with the left first sometimes. You might want to skip in quickly to break that rule, so there are always exceptions to these rules. That's why I won't dwell on them too much. If you're stepping left, you generally step with the left first. However, if you want to move out of the way, you would just pivot very quickly with that left. This is a boxing move. In the same manner, you would step right first and then plant. However, you could easily come across in order to zigzag back. So there are so many steps. There are quick steps, changes. There are rotations to be able to take this leg out of the way. If someone's trying to grab it, you might move. There are all sorts of exceptions, thousands, millions probably. So we'll keep it simple. Practice moving around, left to right, forwards, backwards, side to side. So we've got forwards, left, right and back. Always in stance. So I will just demonstrate what I mean. So from that, it's apparent that some movements or combinations of movements, are more realistic than others and more coherent than others. Some will flow better than others and some won't. However, there's a certain logic that you would want to follow if you were practicing and tying all these moves together with your footwork. So what I just showed you there was known as shadow boxing, where traditionally the shadow would be looked at as a reference. You'd see it on the floor, and it would give you an outline of what you're doing, because only up until recently have we become much more technical and specific and very microscopic in managing movements. In the past, there would just be a shadow to give you that general outline, and you'd be able to see if it looked at all how it should. That's one reason it's called shadow boxing, which basically means in the stance, practicing the moves. Now you think about where the opponent is. If you're doing a punch combination, you wouldn't do an elbow immediately if they were at range. So it's thinking logically, because if they're at arm's range, why would you do an elbow? And if they're far away enough to kick, not only would you not necessarily kick, so you'd run off, but you wouldn't follow that with an elbow, because it's going straight from long range to very short, which is unlikely. It's possible, but it's unlikely. So there's a certain coherence when you're practicing these things to remember and keep in mind. The imagination is key here. Imagining not only internally what's going on and feeling it in your mind's eye, but also what the opponent is doing or might do. This is known as imagery, where you feel the intensity of the situation, keeping an eye on the opponent and imagining what they might do. It doesn't have to be just an opponent. Imagery can really take the form of anything. You can imagine yourself as a ball of energy. That's what we are really inside. And just moving in such a way that relating to this energy really heightens your sense of energy. So it's not in a sense it's a delusion to see yourself as this energy, but it has a very real effect of making somebody more related to that energy, which then brings out that energy that perhaps wasn't there. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in a sense, but that's not the topic now. It's just something to keep in mind, that the mind is a powerful tool that can, and what you can imagine can take on a certain reality. So we've looked at, obviously, footwork, stance, punches, kicks, and tying that together, which is quite extensive. I'll just add in some basic takedown principles and exercises. So if someone tries to throw you to the floor, they might try and hook the leg. So it's important to get those sprawl out the way somewhat. If this leg is forward, that's the one they're going to go for. So if they go for that, you can simply move it back, but then this one's in the way. So it becomes a process of swapping round. Another way, more effective but also not without its risks, is to do a sprawl. I'll just show you what that is. So in this sprawl action, you've actually managed to take your hip away from being grabbed, and then your body has collapsed onto the opponent's head or neck or back, pushing them down. So you've got your legs out of the way, and you're then pushing down with your body on top. So this has its uses because it's an evasive thing, but then if you don't get up immediately, as I did, you risk being caught on the floor and end up in a rolling around on the floor kind of situation, which you don't want, because people that attack others for no good reason generally aren't averse, often won't do so alone. There'll be people you haven't identified, if it's a pub for instance or the street, There'll be people you haven't identified who might jump in. Security guards might take the situation the wrong way, and if you're just defending yourself, you might be seen as an aggressor, because they haven't always seen the whole situation unfold. And there's a strong possibility that as an individual, you or I might not always be working without survival and self-interest, which is always volatile. And when these situations unfold, it's very difficult to remain in complete control. So as martial artists, I think we need to understand that we can be just as bad as the person that we blame for causing all of our altercations and problems. It takes two to tango. So with these things, I practice them, but I've got no intention of using them with anybody. It's an internal process with me. I'm always looking to get out and take the moral high ground, if you like. But there's a certain logic to that, of just being avoiding of these situations, because from a moral point of view, if you have upheld a strong standpoint and you're attacked, for me, I've got that sense of self-respect, and that I would preserve my own life if I held on to a high value, a high ideal. I'd have no problem then, if it was my only option, defending myself to the utmost. However, if people don't necessarily have that fibre, it can be that they crumble and break. However, that's a different conversation. There are plenty of ferocious animals in people that are just unstoppable. And do you want to get involved in that? Do you want to become identified with that? It's very possible that anyone can become a cold-blooded, violent killer, or even psychopath, or anything like that. That's not very difficult to achieve, really. It's just a question of lacking self-control. So, from my perspective at least, there's no point having this capability if it can't be controlled, because then it destroys a certain quality in somebody, and prevents them from internalising the same energy that I see as a waste if it's heedlessly used in fighting all the time. Obviously, some people don't have that luxury, but I think once there's a certain escape out of absolute survival necessity, you can move beyond that to enhancing your well-being and state of health, because survival is essential. But to put survival as the only priority in life seems to me a bit short-sighted. But everybody will have an opinion on that, so that's really not the point. We've looked at, to go back to the main points, we've looked at takedown defense. There's some takedowns you might want to learn just for your own amusement, really, or because you're interested in wrestling. So I'll just quickly show you how to do them. So that was kneeling down to the level of the hips, to then grab the leg through and lift with either side. You can do that. It's very difficult to demonstrate that with one person, but basically you're going down to the level of the knee, the hip, by this sliding motion, hooking under the leg and lifting up as you come through close to them. So if someone were to do it on me, they would be lifting this leg and unbalancing me by pushing through me. Once I'm unbalanced and turned, I'm then easy to throw to the floor, because any throw is quite easy if you've unbalanced the opponent. So in the same way as our balance is determined by dynamic equilibrium and stability, if you can unbalance somebody else, they're going to suffer the same discrepancy in balance that you would if you were to take your eye off that balance yourself. So that's a key point. If you can unbalance the opponent, it doesn't matter how big or strong they are, because anything that's unbalanced, particularly something very big, can be dislodged and unbalanced. So that was just a quick bit at the end there that I haven't really done justice to, but what I've hopefully covered here is some of the basics. It's now over to you to really put those into practice as much or as little as you like. It's all very well me showing you the exact mechanics of the punch or kick, but I want you to develop a system which doesn't rely on somebody validating you, because if you become the system and you really identify with that work, there's no stopping you at all. It's just a question of time and energy rather than correctness and validation. There's room for instruction, of course, and it can be helpful to keep people on the right track and give them something to occupy their mind with. But if you can do that yourself without the assistance, then that's beneficial even if you are training with a system or part of a club. It's like if you had a job, you could see by the end of the month whether you had a bonus, whether you had money, whether you got kept on, whether you got promoted. These are all ways of receiving external validation, and then you might say, well, I've done a good job there. But you might not feel you did deep down, whereas it's possible to have a deep sense of worth with what you're doing and a deep sense of identification with what you're doing, whether that's work, whether that's martial arts. And at that point, because you've identified with the work, with the efforts, it doesn't matter so much what you look like, who you are, whether you're the right type of person that is accepted within whatever you're doing, because you've validated yourself by being switched on and fully engaged, fully involved 100% of the time. And that's what self-mastery is. And it often means coming up against opposition from opinions or others. But at that point, you can say with certainty that it isn't worth bothering trying to prove yourself to others. Not because you're wrong or anything else, but just because there's not enough time and energy to devote to just proving oneself in the world beyond a certain point, as well as maximizing the energy and devotion required of pursuit of self-mastery. So thank you for watching this episode, this instructional I won't say tape, this instructional file, and I hope it's of some benefit. Thanks again. So I'll just do a quick demonstration on the Bob here, my long-standing friend, my long-term friend. He's been with me for some years now, through thick and thin. He's been my constant companion and training partner. But just to show you in action on a solid object how to apply these things. I'm not one to practice too much the hard styles of martial arts. I have been in the past, but it reminds me of a story I heard. There was once a master who went, after training for many years, he went to test his skills in the harshest parts of the world. He travelled around the world. He went to all of the ghettos and everywhere that there was crime, seediness. He wanted exposure to it all as a test. So he went there. He got looked at, he was robbed, and people started trouble with him and everything, as you can imagine. He had a few experiences, a few scrapes here and there. He came back with several disciples from these places. Now, what this means is that along the way there'll be challenges, and there'll be people who really don't agree with anything. However, they can end up being inspired by your example and turn their existence around, if that's what the goal is at the end. So that's something to think about. So that was a quick demonstration of how to apply these moves and the kind of intensity required of the exchange. So it's all about the energy you bring to the bob. And just as a final note, the amount of intensity you bring to the training, whether that's with somebody else or as a coach to somebody else, really determines how much you'll bring out of yourself. So for instance, if you're training and you apply yourself half-heartedly, then all the instruction and correctness in the world will only bring you a certain level of your capacity. However, if you train resourcefully and efficiently, which means taking every moment to see as an opportunity to develop keen awareness and power and improve that way, then you can make big improvements in the smallest circumstances. So as a final note, it's all about what you bring to the training. If you have a classroom full of students and none of them are listening, they don't realise it, but they're responsible for the environment that isn't very stimulating. Whereas if they brought everything in, that would encourage the teacher, in this example, they would have to provide more, because there would be an insatiable, relentless thirst for knowledge and progress. And that's the kind of mentality which will bring improvements even in spite of lack of training equipment, lack of partners, or even lack of ability. So you can achieve in spite of yourself and your surroundings. Thanks for watching.